Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hello everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Dave Percy, and I'll be hosting the show today. Up first on the watch warning advisory graphic, a lot of watches out here for the next storm coming across the Bering Sea, currently in the Russian Far East, but looking for snow and wind to come back into the area starting tomorrow, and then as that whole system will be shifting southeastward, there's a high wind warning out for the Pribilofs for later on tomorrow and tomorrow night, expecting those northwest winds that kick up to 70, possibly gusts as high as 80 miles per hour. Won't be any higher than that, but look for 60, 70 miles per hour on those wind gusts. And down to the Alaska Peninsula, Eastern Aleutians, high wind watches out there with wind gusts possibly as high as 90 miles per hour occurring as that system comes down to the south, while probably at the same time it'll stay quite windy back up to the north and the snow will advance. We've got winter weather advisories out for the Kuskokwim Valley on down into Bristol Bay, and then the advisory areas here for the Tanana Valley and along the Alaska Range up into the 40-mile country to Eagle. That's currently due to end early Friday evening, about 6 p.m. or so, maybe lingering a little bit longer here over toward the border, but definitely winding down up in this area. As the warnings down here over the northern southeast coast, they'll be ending around 6 p.m. Friday evening here to the west, maybe hanging on a little bit longer over toward the east there. And again, anywhere from 6 to 12 inches of snow having falling in that area. And they'll be hanging on over especially over toward Hyder, the winter weather advisories for snow for probably in through much of the evening and then ending back to the west. Another look at that shows we got the winter weather advisories here, including St. Lawrence Island. I'm sorry, that's a watch, a winter storm watch here, St. Lawrence Island, Seward Peninsula, even the northwest coast. They're all due to that system will be pulling eastward out of Russia. You can see quite a cloud shield with that system. Low still way back to the western, even the front coming right through there. High pressure ridging up through this area. So there's a warm front spilling some rain into the Pribilof Islands this afternoon, and then clouds slipping on down to the Alaska Peninsula. Winds diminishing today, or overnight. King Cove had gusts up to about 75 miles per hour, and then those have come down dramatically, but AKwx still seeing gusts around 50 miles an hour, but that'll all be in a downward trend. Got some clearing over Bristol Bay, of course clearing over Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast, and then this is a storm that brought the heavy snow to the northern southeast coast with rain and snow down to the south, again depending on your elevation, and brought the, again, anywhere from 6 to 12 inches having fallen up here over the northern areas up towards Haines in the Skagway area along the Klondike Highway, and rain and wind on down to the south with, again, the snow levels quite low there, and especially at any higher elevations could pick up anywhere as high as maybe 11 inches of snow. That would mostly be over toward the Hyder area as a storm total before it ends. Otherwise, not much going on up to the north, just a few clouds, areas of light snow along the Arctic coast, locally over the north slope. Otherwise, something of a break here over the west central interior. On the chart, there's that 989 low center right off the southeast coast, the front in advance of that. Again, the gusty southeast winds, milder temperatures, rain and snow, depending on your elevation again there over the southern areas, and then pretty good snowfall amounts occurring over the northern panhandle, really lightening up though this afternoon back toward Yakutat and ending by the time you get to Cordova. And then variably cloudy to mostly clear skies, southern Alaska, Prince William Sound, and then those winds on gusty, pretty gusty, as I mentioned, across Kodiak Island, gusts 50 miles an hour, and then some snow hung up on the north and west side of the Alaska Range, but that's really light. Higher pressure back out to the west is about shut it off altogether in advance of, again, this warm front, though, bringing rain into St. Matthew Island on down to the Pribilofs, and then more rain and wind here back to the west. So you guess about 40 miles an hour ahead of that front occurring there, Adak and Atka, with rain back towards Shemya. Forecast for tonight, whole thing moves eastward with main push up to the north here with rain continuing, probably increasing, becoming a little heavier there for the Pribilof Islands. Wind not all that much of a factor here for the Aleutians. Southwest 15 to 35, maybe gusts of 40 possible, and that's about it. But look for some light rain to move into the eastern Aleutians. Rain and fog, warm front type weather there, spreading possibly into the Alaska Peninsula, and also that warmer air bringing rain up to St. Lawrence Island. Low center now tracking eastward, but still hanging back to the west. High pressure, look for some clearing skies, temperatures falling well below zero, possibly as low as 25 below zero in the cooler areas up there for the Berks Range into the upper Yukon Valley. Milder due to the low clouds, fog, and flurries there along the Arctic coast. This system, again, the warnings ending, advisories coming down from west to east here, and mostly rain over the southern southeast coast up higher elevation, staying in the form of snow up there to the north, and then gusty outflow northerly winds through the Copper River Delta for the North Gulf Coast. And not too bad, a little breezy, channeled areas, Resurrection Bay, see a north wind in Seward, possibly Whittier, and then winds coming down Kodiak Island, but remaining dry, and generally mostly clear and cold here over interior Alaska for tonight. I think I mentioned those lows dropping well below zero over much of the eastern interior. Not quite as cold where the clouds hang on there through the Tanana Valley, and then rain advances to the southwest coast. For tomorrow, now things really begin to slide downhill now. The low center beginning almost going to start taking a turn to the southeast. So rain, wind move into the southwest coast, Bristol Bay, mixing into mixed precipitation, which could include freezing rain here to the north, and then the snow farther back to the west. The front now, look for windy conditions, periods of rain from the Pribilofs on down to the eastern Aleutians, improving out west with high pressure building in over the western Bering Sea. And then the outlook for Sunday, we've got that low center now tracking southeastward, just south of the Kenai Peninsula, so that's going to bring some snow across south central Alaska, areas of at least back to the Alaska Range, on back to the northwest, and then surges of snow coming down with the strongest winds will be along and off the coast, and then on to the southeast, snow over the Kuskokwim Valley, southwest interior up to about Norton Sound, and another band here coming down across Kotzebue Sound. Mostly clear up to the north, and then high pressure and the next front farther out to the west. Looking at lows for tonight, again, well below zero, anywhere from 0 to 20 below, maybe 25 below in the colder areas. Milder here along the southwest coast, lower 30s though, so even the coastline dropping a shade below freezing, but staying in the 40s for the Pribilofs. Pretty chilly south central Alaska again, with anywhere from 0 to 15 above. Well below zero, Copper River Basin. Look for lows in the 20s over portions of the Panhandle, mostly north, above freezing down to the south. Highs for tomorrow, staying below zero. Northway, Tok, Fairbanks, right around zero for the highs, and then well below zero up across the northeast valleys, and then back towards zero along the eastern Arctic coast with lower 30s here along the coast, except Nunivak Island up to 40 degrees, 36, and then there's a 45 at St. Paul, 43 Alaska Peninsula. And then for Sunday morning, even colder up here. Now we're seeing the 20 to 30 below range areas for the upper Yukon Valley, minus teens for the Arctic coast, 20s for the southwest coast, and chillier here for the Panhandle, teens in the north, and 20s to mid 30s down to the south, with mid to upper 30s along the Alaska Peninsula, and mid to upper 30s also for the Aleutians, to lower 30s for St. Lawrence Island. Then highs Sunday afternoon, well below zero here over the northeast interior, and near zero along the Arctic coast, milder down over the Bristol Bay zones to the Aleutians.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving into the aviation section now, batch IFR here extending all the way from the Atka Island area over to the Alaska Peninsula and northward, right through the Bering Strait there across St. Lawrence Island, catching the western Seward Peninsula. and then marginal VFR just in advance of that. Otherwise, we've got mostly marginal conditions over the central and southern panhandle there, and some lingering, kind of a narrow area of possible marginal VFR. That's on the north side of the Alaska Range, and then up over the upper Yukon Valley as well as eastern Arctic coast. Tomorrow afternoon, this whole area shifts inland, swinging in across Bristol Bay, and actually reaching southern Cook Inlet in the afternoon, all the way back to the northwest across the Seward Peninsula, now getting into the Kotzebue Sound area with VFR out in advance, except for this zone through here. And then we've got VFR for the North Gulf Coast, marginal VFR for the Panhandle. On to Sunday afternoon, we've got marginal VFR here sliding in to the southern southeast coast there, but generally VFR conditions. IFR now over the south central Alaska area to the North Gulf Coast, Kodiak Island, as well as back over the southeast Bering Sea and mostly along and north of the Alaska Peninsula. Marginal VFR down to the south, improving up here to the north now, just marginal VFR St. Lawrence Island and the Bering Strait, hugging the central and western North Gulf Coast, a breakout through here. Next system pushing IFR into the western Aleutians. And then for passes, tomorrow, Saturday, it looks really good. A lot of interior Alaska VFR, Brooks Range, Yanutuvik, Adigan, good VFR tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill, also wide open with VFR, as well as rainy, windy, Isabel and Mentasta, looking really good for the day on Saturday with Tanita, VFR, also Portage, and Chilkoot and White, VFR as well. Freezing levels, cold air again with trough currently coming southward and then kicking off to the east. 2,000 feet though hanging up over the southern southeast coast and then surfaced up along the coastline. And then with the upper level ridge and southerly flow, 10,000 feet over the central Aleutians. We've got the 2,000 foot freezing level line all the way up into the Russian Far East. Moving on to the icing threat here. A pretty good chance of seeing some moderate or considerable rime icing, moderate rime icing here right through this area, catching St. Lawrence Island and another batch here right off the coast there, Togiak Bay and Bristol Bay. Another chance out toward the central Aleutian areas. Otherwise, just areas of light to isolated rime icing possible there. None over the interior, of course. Could be some light or scattered areas of maybe mixed icing here over the central panhandle with the heavier stuff staying on down to the south. Looking at the jet stream for tomorrow at 33,000 feet, here's that ridging now shifting eastward with a trough hung up there over the Gulf of Alaska. Not really hung up, it's be in this position roughly tomorrow afternoon. 120 knot northerly jet there right across Kodiak Island and coming down across the Alaska Range, drops well to the south, cutting back in even south of the Queen Charlottes. Next system here coming out of the Russian Far East will be moving in, bringing the heavy weather into the northwest interior initially. Taking a look at 9,000 feet for midday tomorrow. Weak ridging right up west central interior. Again, everything moving eastward and good west-northwest winds behind this trough here, along and behind it, 40 to 50 knots, all the way back to the western Aleutians, and then some pretty good westerlies there across the central Aleutian areas. Also northwesterlies, at least starting out on the brisk side here, 30 to 35 knots to the North Gulf Coast, on down to Kodiak Island. Really light winds over the panhandle, mostly northerly though, but about 5 to 10 knots. And then for the 3,000 foot wind flow chart, again, ridging there, weak high center at this level, right up there off the Arctic coast, 10 to 15 knot winds through the interior, 25 knot northwesterlies there across Kodiak, just off the Kenai Peninsula, as well as here over the panhandle. Kind of a variable wind condition here, not really strong, 5 to 15 knots. That's about it. And then back here to the west, those stronger westerlies along and north of the Aleutians, 40 to 50 knots, 25 knots for Bristol Bay, and then 25 to 35 knots along the remainder of the Aleutian chain. Southeast, 30 knots there up around St. Lawrence Island. Turbulence-wise, moderate chop here, Bering Strait on down into the Yukon Delta, light to isolated moderate chop along the eastern central Aleutians, and up over the the eastern North Gulf Coast.
NOAA's national marine sanctuaries protect areas of national significance for their exceptional natural beauty and resources. Research and monitoring expeditions provide scientists with valuable knowledge about the biodiversity and ecological integrity of these fragile underwater systems. The knowledge does not come easy. Their mission is challenging and sometimes dangerous, but these risks pale in comparison to the wealth of information that awaits them. This is Expedition Sanctuary Quest. Preparing a research vessel to go to sea is a huge undertaking. Over the course of one day, the empty ship transforms into a high-tech research platform. Tons of equipment, provisions, and supplies have to be loaded and stowed. The crew must double-check every last detail. Once at sea, the ship must be entirely self-sufficient. To keep everything running smoothly, the crew charts a cruise plan to coincide with the schedule of research. The goal of this expedition is to assess the health of offshore and nearshore marine ecosystems. The NOAA ship MacArthur will spend 2 months at sea, focusing on all the national marine sanctuaries along the West Coast, from Southern California to Northern Washington. Research takes place around the clock, and as night closes over the sanctuary, a team of special map makers deploy their side-scan sonar. The sonar will provide acoustic information to make detailed maps of the ocean floor. As one set of scientists are finishing up the night shift, another is being called to start their day. Wake-up calls come early, usually before the sun is up. By dawn, Chief Scientist Sarah Fangman is on the bridge, checking the plans for the deployment of the remotely operated vehicle.
Our weather has turned a little bit, and so we're going to have to move to a more protected area where we can work. Well, as long as we're heading in this direction, because the weather is forcing us that way, we'd like to stop.
Once calmer waters are found, the science continues. The remotely operated vehicle crew prepares their machine for its dive. The ROV allows the scientists to penetrate the unexplored depths, which account for 90% of the ocean. There is no idle time. While the ROV is being prepared, another group of scientists takes seawater and surface plankton samples. As the samples are collected, they go straight to the onboard lab, where they are processed and analyzed.
The ROV can stay down many hours, whereas divers are limited with supplied air, and we can rotate shifts and go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
The cameras on the ROV are the scientists' eyes into the ocean. These cameras will confirm what the scientists have found through the side-scan sonar mapping. The ROV also allows scientists the opportunity to do species counts and more detailed habitat classification.
Yes, look at the anemones and the corals, cup corals.
Oh yeah.
That is
excellent.
gorgeous.
Excellent. Habitat's changed dramatically.
Yeah.
Oh,
did you see
nice
it just
one.
caught
Right.
that?
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Oh yeah.
A research ship can be a dangerous place with hazards all around. Everyone must be alert to these and know how to deal with emergencies. Fire and evacuation drills are performed without warning at any time of the day or night. As the science work goes on, the ship's crew also works around the clock. Engineers keep the engines operating properly, while the deck officers constantly monitor the ship's location. The deck crew operates all the machinery needed to perform the research, and the galley crew has to be sure all 40 people on board get fed. As night falls again, another shift of scientists begin their work in trawling for plankton.
Half moon out there, so there's quite a bit of light, which will affect how fast and how high these critters come up in the water column.
Okay, watch the slack there, folks.
Okay, got her. Let her go.
One more step in measuring productivity of an area.
Juvenile deposits, krill, squid, copepods.
After a long, wet night, dawn finally comes. The ship begins a transit to the next area for work. As miles of ocean slide beneath the hull, the observations and data collecting continue. Seabird and marine mammal observers are out working. Bird and whale counts help determine the health of a given area. For 2 months, this grueling schedule of day and night scientific work continues, searching for the understanding that will provide solutions to better manage resources within our national marine sanctuaries.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. We've got today's sea ice analysis done today, Friday. Not much change up here, still socked in here on the east side, and then actually expanding a little bit more away from the coast here, right along the central coast. But back here to the west, not much change, but with the colder air expected to come in here over the weekend. Probably looking at a little more in the way of growth than what we saw the last few days here, mostly along the west coast, and then on up into the Chukchi Sea. And for the marine excuse me, north 45 knots, northern Lynn Canal tomorrow, 10-foot seas, falling back to about 25 for Stevens Passage, southeast 20 for Clarence Strait. Light winds here on the south coast, picking up to 30 knots with gusts as high as 45 knots there on the north coast, 9 to 8-foot seas. And then for Sunday, hold on to those 45-knot northerly winds now, throwing the gusts to 60 knots for northern Lynn Canal, and now 25 gusts 40 for Stevens Passage. Light winds for Clarence Strait and the south coast, picking up to about 25 out of the east with higher gusts on the north coast. For Prince William Sound, tomorrow north, 20 knots, higher gusts out of the bays, usual areas there, Passage Canal, and then for gust 45 knots there for the North Gulf Coast, otherwise small craft advisories turning northwest at 30 for the Barren Islands, back into Kachemak Bay, north 20 there for Cook Inlet. Sunday's outlook, gales now, southern Cook Inlet up to 35 knots, down across Kachemak Bay, east 40 knots for the Barren Islands and the North Gulf Coast, all east at 40 with 11 to 12-foot seas, northeast 30 for Prince William Sound, with those seas up to 7 feet. Out west, Bristol Bay, southeast 20 knots, west 20 here on the south side of the peninsula, northwest 30 for the area southwest of Sitkinak, Silkoff Strait, 25 out of the northwest, and 30 knots there, northwest for Kodiak, southwest 30 knots there on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. Next day, big increase in the winds now. North winds, 50 knots, coming right on down to the Alaska Peninsula, and then south side turning northwest at 50 knots. And of course, there'll be much higher gusts out of those channeled areas. Seas up to 31 feet. 45 knots out of the northwest there for the Bristol Bay area. Northwest 40, southwest of Kodiak here. 45 knots along the east coast of Kodiak Island. So a really windy day spreading into that area on Sunday. And for the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, west-southwest 30 knots, and on out to Adak and Atka with 25-knot winds right out of the west-northwest for the Shemya area. Then those turn south, pick up to 40 knots in the afternoon with that next front edging its way eastward, and otherwise small craft advisory. Central Aleutians, storm force winds 40 to 50 knots here, 50 knot winds right across Unalaska Island with 31-foot seas here on the Bering Sea side and about 20 feet south side. And for the southwest coast, small craft advisory, south winds 25 to 30 knots, increasing to gales for St. Lawrence Island at 35, 11-foot seas, westerlies 30 knots there for the northern Bering Sea into the Pribilofs with a 13-foot sea. And then for Sunday, storms widespread here. Pribilofs back up to the northern Bering Sea. Storms along the southwest coast, 50 knots, seas 25 to 30 feet, 45 knot winds for St. Lawrence Island. And for the Arctic coast here, light winds on the east side and the central coast, but small craft advisories with 30 knot winds there for the west side down to Wales. And then the outlook for Sunday, east 30 knots here from Wales up to about Cape Thompson. And then from Cape Thompson on up the west side there, east-northeast at 25. Central coast on over Demarcation Point, picking up the winds there, but not too bad, east 20 with 4-foot seas here in the remaining open water areas there, the central coast. And then for tonight, winter storm warnings ending here after the 6 to 12 inches fell over the northern panhandle. That'll be moving off, and this area of precipitation will be becoming lighter, probably a little more mixed in areas, especially with any elevation here over the south, staying snow in the north, dry, gusty winds along the North Gulf Coast, dry over the interior, falling below zero definitely in the clear areas north of the Alaska Range, even the Copper River Basin. Next storm, though, warm air sliding northward here, rain approaching the southwest coast, on up to St. Lawrence Island, increasing rain and wind. And then for the Saturday outlook, all that weather coming down, wind, rain, snow on the increase all through here, slipping on down to the Bristol Bay area. And then that low center moves southeast, strong winds, colder temperatures following in behind. Have a great evening, and thanks for joining us.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.